because we're now in the longest shutdown in US history, and I wanted to get your take on why you think that this has lasted for so long.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it never had to happen. Generally, when there's a continuing resolution, it's something agreed to by Democrats and Republican leadership in the House and the Senate. And we've done that, I think, every year I've been there, at least some form of it, because we didn't get the budget done on time. This year, we're a little more behind than usual with the Republicans in charge of everything. But also, a CR, the way they wrote it, without any Democratic representation, locks in the healthcare cuts from the big ugly law, locks in the food assistance cuts, locks in the education cuts, locks in the rescissions that the president did, stealing funds that Congress approved in a bipartisan way. So it is anything but a normal continuing resolution. But the fight really is around health care. 15 million people will lose their health care, and all of us will pay more for health care because of the changes they did in that big ugly law. And we're simply fighting for people to have affordable and accessible health care. And, this fight, I think the American people get, at least from our perspective. And the Republicans have been all over the place trying to pass blame. They're the ones in charge of everything. They had ability to get this done. But, it's unfortunate that they're not even coming to work on the House side right now because 7 weeks of paid vacation is a nice gig if you can get it, but most people can't get that.
And so is the Democrat strategy working right now, as you just said, wanting to get those extensions in this bill before passing it? Is that strategy working as we're now in the longest shutdown in US history?
Well, the American people certainly want us to do that, right? You can see it from all the polling. So if the Republicans choose to accept that or not, the problem is they jeopardized 15 million people's health care. Plus, we're all seeing the increases in group plans and others because of their actions without any alternative. They've had literally 15 years since this was passed to have an alternative healthcare plan. The closest we got was during the presidential debate. Donald Trump had a concept of a plan, which, by the way, we never saw that concept. You can't take away healthcare without having some sort of alternative. And, that is fundamentally the Republicans' problem.
The American people really feel like this is kind of a stalemate right now. Are Dems making any leeway with Republicans about getting these extensions in this bill?
Well, I think in the Senate, there's some conversations. The real problem is around the House. Speaker Mike Johnson has not had us in for 7 weeks in a row now. This is the seventh week. And you have to be there. We have a farm bill that's 2 years overdue. We have an Older Americans Act reauthorization that I think is a year overdue. We have a bunch of things to do, and simply holding your breath and hiding in your basement and drinking pina coladas is not acceptable. We have to be in Washington to do our jobs. And unfortunately, I've gone there various weeks. No Republicans are there. We don't have committees meeting. Nothing is happening. That is fundamentally the real issue. Also, by the way, I think there's something like 2 weeks or less than 2 weeks left to that arbitrary deadline they put together. That has to force us to get back no matter what. So hopefully their breath holding is over. Hopefully we can get back to work. But anything short of that, I think, is really dereliction of duty.
And so some of your fellow colleagues have said that the Democrats are holding the Republican Party hostage with this. Can I get your response to that?
Yeah, they're in charge of the House and the Senate and the White House. I think everyone gets that. They did a CR, unlike how we do CRs, where you get together and work with people. You know, it's very clear who's at fault. But I just want to get back to work. I don't need to point any more fingers. What I want to do is have the House bring us back to work. Let's start negotiating other legislation if that makes them feel better. But doing nothing is it not in the best interest in any way? By the end of the year, if we don't do something on the farm bill, just as an example, it goes back to an old formula for how we price milk that will be devastating to dairy farmers in Wisconsin. We have real work to do. And I think, people like Derek Van Orden and Brian Style and others got to get out of their basements and be a little more active in convincing their leadership to get us back to work.
And I want to get your take too. There's talk of a deal, some Senate Democrats speaking with Republicans about passing the House's GOP's clean funding resolution in exchange for a vote on those ACA subsidies after the government reopens. Do you think that that's a fair deal?
I think they have to get really ironclad language. Part of the problem is in the past, if you had an agreement, Article 1 of the Constitution gives a spending authority to Congress. That was how the federal government spent money. Donald Trump then is breaking the law by doing what's called rescissions, a Washington word for stealing money that Congress approved in a bipartisan way. We think that's illegal. There are law challenges on that. No other president has done what he's doing. But it's hard to have a deal with someone when you know that another partner, Donald Trump, could break the deal immediately, and then everything you fought for isn't a reality. So I think the tricky part is how do you really have ironclad language, and how do you make the Republicans stand up to Donald Trump if he breaks those deals?
Would you ever pass or would you ever support a deal like this? I mean, we are seeing 700,000 Wisconsinites right now who are not really sure when their SNAP benefits are going to come back into their pockets. What kind of hurt does it take for this something like this to be more appealing to Democrats?
Well, the good news is Congress did put a contingency fund together of between 5 and 6 billion, which will cover about 3/4 of a month's SNAP benefits. The president was refusing to use it. Two courts have forced him to, but even the Department of Agriculture under Donald Trump admits that the congressional intent was to use those funds. There never should have been a fight to begin with. But you have to remember, in that big ugly law, Republicans, every Republican in Wisconsin, voted to cut SNAP benefits by $158 billion. Literally, millions of people won't have access to food assistance. So it's a little hard to take those folks, especially seriously right now, other than showing up at work, negotiating, and getting something done. But you can't do it from across the country. Those talks aren't happening. They refuse to sit down with us. That is what's got to end because anyone else who doesn't show up at work, guess what? They get fired.
Is there any kind of deal that you would support right now to reopen the government, or is it really just seeing the subsidy extension in the bill?
Right now, it's kind of in the hands of the Senate because they could do something and send it back to us. So I'm not sure what those conversations are because I'm not obviously in the Senate, but I assume they are around the tax subsidies for people on the Affordable Care Act, and hopefully some language that if we do pass a spending bill, there may be some automatic way to say Congress will not allow the president to do rescissions, that we would not vote to approve those rescissions because you don't have a deal if, again, someone steals the funds that you just agreed to in a bipartisan way. And unfortunately, that's how Donald Trump has been conducting himself in this presidency.
And I want to get your take too, because Congressman Style has proposed a bill that would stop lawmakers in Congress from getting paid during the shutdown and deduct payments from the next Congress for each day the government isn't funded come another shutdown. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, there never should be a provision that says members of Congress get paid. That's why people like myself are withholding our pay until federal employees get their pay, because that's, I think, the right thing to do. But having said that, you got to remember half of Congress are millionaires. I am not. And because of that, we have to remember that a lot of people don't rely on those paychecks. And because of that, it really depends on how the language is drafted because it could be used as a hammer or a tool to make people do something. But we shouldn't have a provision that exempts members of Congress from other federal employees to begin with. So the devil's in the details, but it would be better if Representative Style would tell his leadership to have us back to work. And I know I have seen Brian in Washington when I was out there one week, so I'll give him credit for that. But he needs to use his voice and his spine to stand up and talk to his leadership and tell them they need to do the right thing and bring us back to work.
And I want to move back to SNAP now because this has been a really big conversation in Wisconsin, of course, as this shutdown continues. Now, we did see last Friday two judges ruling, as you were mentioning, to bring those funds back, but we're not exactly sure what timeline that looks like. So, do you think that the state should be stepping in here to help kind of supplement that program?
Well, it should be immediate. I mean, we put those funds out on a regular basis. It should be literally as simple as just a computer button pressing. So Donald Trump is just, withholding to try to force people to do things, and that's totally unacceptable. The problem is for the state, the governor just can't do it on his own. You'd have to bring the legislature together. There are other people involved and a timeline that makes it more difficult, which is why Donald Trump should just comply with what the judges told him and release the funds that Congress put aside for this very reason that they even admit we said was the congressional direction, which is, by the way, Article 1 of the Constitution giving the power of the purse to Congress. So once again, this comes back to Donald Trump thinking he's somehow above the law or he's a king when he is nothing but a co-equal branch of government to Congress if we actually stand up to him. And obviously, by not being in Washington, we're not doing a lot of standing up.
And one last question for you here. How do you see this shutdown ending?
I'm hoping, I mean, the reality is their artificial deadline of 7 weeks is almost done. So you have to kind of bring us back, right, to put a new deadline out there of whatever they're going to try to propose. So look, it's time to quit holding your breath. House Republicans have to call us back into session. We have to deal with this issue and many other issues. But to continue not having us at work, I think, is something the American people are really tired of.
Do you think as we approach that deadline, we could see more resolution?
I think so. You almost have to, right? Because if the deadline is completely gone, they lose any credibility in why they're not bringing us to work. So I think it is getting to the point that their tactic has not worked for them, and I think they've got to have a new tactic, which is bringing us back in because the deadline they put out there was not is not going to work at this point. So to me, that's probably the single thing moving us towards some resolution.
And do you think Democrats' tactic is working?
Well, it is because the American people are right now getting their health care bills for next year. On the Affordable Care Act, people are going to get up to $1,000 or $2,000 a month in increases in their plans per month, $2,000. And we're all getting our group plans right now. Employers are, and I had one Madison employer told me they got a 41% increase for next year. And that's because of the big ugly law. By creating so much uncompensated care, by taking healthcare away from 15 million people, insurance companies are factoring that in, and we're all getting increases because of it. So it's not just, and I don't mean to say the word just, 15 million people losing healthcare. It is all of us paying more. And that's why we've had this fight. And I think the American people have a much better understanding of what they did in that law and why we need to change things.
That's all I have for you this morning, Congressman. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.